Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Agasicles statements from GearWorks.com and the E2KG Network podcast channel on YouTube, as well as the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube. Back with another episode of It's Another Thing Movies. This is episode number 5, and here with me, as always, I have my stalwart and faithful companion, Mr. Peter Morrow. How you doing, Peter?
Good. How you doing tonight?
I'm not great. I am nursing a cold that is really aggravating because there's not a ton of
There's not much you can do.
yeah. But yeah, so there we are. So and it's been snow days here the last couple of days. So there we are with that too. So tonight so if you don't know the shtick, a couple of times a month, optimally, Peter and I get together to talk about a movie assignment that we worked out with each other over the preceding 2 weeks on a streaming service of our choice. Typically, historically, it has primarily been Netflix. We are trying to branch out into including movies from Amazon and Hulu and anything else in the mix. I know when I was shuffling the deck tonight in the draft agenda, again with the cold and everything, I was like, I just went for Netflix because it was the easiest thing to pull the thread on. So, but then we get together and do a review podcast of that movie in an effort to kind of highlight and render our opinion on content that has recently dropped that you might be interested in, but haven't gotten around to watching yet. This is a spoiler reviews show, so if you have not watched this particular movie, you may want to stop it, go watch it, and then come back and listen to us and join in on the conversation. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Godzilla, the Planet Eater. This is the third movie in an anime trilogy that has spanned, I guess, the last couple of years. And admittedly, I'm going to be looking at some things kind of on the fly here. We looked at them before, but again, with the cold, they're not necessarily sticking. So I think the first movie actually came out so it was 2017. So it spanned, like I said, the last couple of years, 2017 until the beginning of this year, although the movies typically come out like a couple of months earlier in Japan and then wind up showing up on Netflix. And I haven't necessarily been able to follow the money on how Netflix finances this. I don't know if they're involved with primary production financing or if they're just distribution. Peter, did you see anything in that particular vein?
I'm not sure. I'm thinking, they just have the worldwide distribution outside of Japan.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, at least the Wikipedia entry just says just lists Netflix as a distribution partner.
Yeah.
So this is the third movie in a trilogy where the setup is that at the beginning of the trilogy, and actually, funnily enough, these movies are, at least two of the movies are similarly named. One is Planet of the Monsters, that's the first one, and then the last one is Planet Eater. So I mistakenly watched Planet of the Monsters at first, and then had to go back and watch the actual assignment. And Peter, did you wind up watching the City on the Edge of Battle?
Yeah, I only watched the Planet Eaters.
Okay.
I didn't have a chance to watch the other guys.
Okay, no problem. So the setup for the whole trilogy is that before the trilogy starts, that human beings were basically chased off of planet Earth by Godzilla and all of the various monsters that he fights. Is there a particular name for them, or I forget?
Kaiju?
Kaiju, yes. So, and again, probably in more recent history in the United States, at least, we've had, I guess, a resurgence of this subgenre of movies with things like Pacific Rim and Pacific Rim 2. So, sorry, popping the top of my coffee here. But basically, they were chased off the planet Earth. One of the principal characters, Haruo Sakaki, who is a captain in it's essentially kind of like a Battlestar Galactica Space Force. It's a combination of three races. Two of the races arrived on Earth to try and help humanity defeat these monsters. They failed, and so the three races exfiltrated the planet and set off on a multi-decade journey across the cosmos looking for an inhabited world. Near the end of their resources, they still had not found a planet and made the decision that their best option at that point was to return to Earth and try and reclaim it, thinking that at this point they would have figured out a way to defeat Godzilla, or that even potentially Godzilla would have died. So the first movie was kind of a little more of your standard kind of monster flick where there's a journey to the planet. They get to the planet. They deploy a bunch of military forces. There's some science fictionary Star Trek, science babble-y stuff on how they're going to defeat the monster. There's a big attack scene, and they all go after Godzilla. It partially fails because their assumptions are incorrect. They figure something out, and then they're able to survive the battle at least. So that was kind of the setup for the first movie. And I found the first movie actually enjoyable. Peter, while I get the social media out, why don't you give me and the listeners and viewers your general impressions of this movie without getting into too many of the specific details?
The third movie?
Yeah, the actual movie assignment.
Oh, okay. So, the basic setup for this movie is that, there's apparently stuff that happens in the second movie that I have no idea on. So I was really lost during a lot of this movie. I didn't realize that it was not a standalone. So if you're looking at watching this, start with the first one. But basically, after the destruction of basically the human settlement on Earth, the three remaining forces really kind of start to break apart, and there's a lot of fragmentation. There's a cult that kind of begins and really takes hold among a lot of the soldiers, and this movie was hard for me to track, probably because I did not watch any of the other two, unfortunately. But it felt a lot like the 1970s Godzilla movie where they were fighting the trash monster. There was a lot of environmentalism undertones, and talks about balance and harmony with nature, especially among the indigenous humans that were left on the planet. As the cult gains power, they kind of seize control in almost a coup and summon a extra-dimensional kaiju to basically destroy Godzilla and the Earth and everything. It's kind of a doomsday cult. So from that aspect, I actually found the movie fairly interesting. It was definitely an experiment in world building, and I felt like I did it a disservice not watching the first two. So I'm definitely going to try and get back there and watch the rest of them.
Yeah, you actually covered a lot more than I was.
Well, you just let me ramble, so.
Yeah, no, that's good. Unfortunately, we always have to do that because I can't talk and get the social media out at the same time. But yeah, so, and I mean, you really covered it. I mean, the only things that you missed, I mean, having watched the first movie gave me enough substance to kind of piece together what happened in the second movie. So in the second movie, after launching that initial attack and being repulsed, so the three races are as far as I can tell, I think they're humans, a race called the Billisudo, and a race called the Exif. Now they're all humanoids, so I don't really understand what the difference is. I mean, the Exif I think are just really tall, and I'm not sure what the difference is with the Billisudo. But
the Exif kind of reminded me of elves. fantasy elves.
Yes, and in some ways, without the nasty attitude, a lot like the misbegotten aliens that were in that, was it Travolta, Forrest Whitaker uh, movie? You remember what I'm talking about? It was a sci-fi movie. It was,
You talking Battlefield Earth?
yes, yeah. Uh, but not nearly as horrible. Um, so what happened in the second movie, as far as I could tell, is the only, I mean, I don't know, I couldn't piece together a whole lot, but they apparently encountered another race on Earth. I guess um, the remnants of humanity who had developed a new culture and gone underground, living in caves, and had lost a lot of their ability for speech. Apparently, in this movie, we find out that they have developed a capability for telepathy, actually to a point where their articulation when they are speaking telepathically is what you would kind of expect from a normal human today. But when they try and speak in spoken word, they sound kind of like 5-year-olds. They sound very atrophied. So that was kind of a surprise because what you hear initially in this movie, at least, is you hear kind of the 5-year-old speak, and then you hear them speak telepathically. So one of the things that has gone on in the movie from the beginning is that one of the principal exif that is presented at the very beginning of the first movie, Metphis, has taken a particular interest in Captain Haruo Sakaki, and has kind of been a champion of his throughout the whole movie. In fact, the first movie starts with him basically being thrown in the brig because his grandfather, I think, is being sent down to a planet that is knowingly uninhabitable. And basically this ship, and it's all of the older people on the ship. And Haruo knows that they're probably going to die. He knows that the planet's not hospitable. And in fact, they go down to the planet and they blow up like on the descent into orbit. And Haruo accuses the leadership council of the ship of basically sacrificing the elderly in an effort, kind of a lifeboat Earth move to manage resources. So Metphis has been with Haruo apparently through these first two movies. In this third one, things kind of take a twist where, in my opinion, Metphis kind of becomes the bad guy. As you mentioned, there is suddenly this religious aspect, which was not as strong in the first movie. But I mean, goes full on like.
Yeah, that really got culty real quick.
Right. So the Exif are a race of very religious beings. Now they do believe in a god, and they call that, they refer to that being by the name God, which also kind of threw me off. Usually, in a movie, in a way to steer away from Christianity, they usually come up with a different name for whatever their supreme being is. They did not in this movie. So what it looks like Metphis has been doing the whole time is, in the first movie, he just tries to make Haruo out to be a hero. By the third movie, he's trying to make him out to be a messiah. And I thought that was incredibly interesting. And really what it takes on is this plot of Metphis really trying to become kind of the power behind the throne, and he's really manipulating Haruo into position so that he can give the people something to follow. So to back up just a little bit, like we talked about the genesis of this movie. Usually we have a bunch of like preceding historical financial data and performance data and things to go through. There's nothing like that on this. The only real statistical data I have is the runtime of the movie, which is 1:30. Peter, I guess maybe the first thing I want to ask you about is, how did you feel about the pacing and overall length of the film?
It took a while for the movie to get going for me, again, because I didn't have the background of the other movies. So I felt that as a standalone movie, the pacing and just didn't feel like it was going anywhere for a while. There was Yeah, I was missing a lot of that character development. I didn't really care about most of the characters, and yeah, I really hamstringed myself there. But once things started happening, I found the pacing to be fine. I liked the overall length of the movie.
Okay, yeah, and I don't think you necessarily hamstrung yourself by missing the first movie. This is, I mean, for people who are familiar with the comics book world, this is a talking heads movie if there ever was one. And I think what I feel like what Peter's referring to is it takes an hour really before anything really starts happening. Everything is just a bunch of talking up until then, and I mean, it is some existential,
Oh
metaphysical,
yeah,
straight Dalai
it's
Lama.
deep.
Yeah, so um, and it's somewhere, and I haven't figured out where I settle it down on what it is. It's somewhere between, in a broad swath between, like really high order, high functional intellectual stuff to be like critically parsed, all the way down to just complete anime like silliness, right? And it's tough for me to determine where this lands. I found the pacing to be pretty horrific. Again, the first movie was very much more, and it was heavy in dialogue also, but it was still. I mean, but there the split was more like it was like 45 minutes of talking before they start mounting the attack and actually descend to the planet's surface. And so you have, and that's not unusual. It's not unusual in a sci-fi action adventure movie for the movie to split in half. And I was able to get through that. This one, I definitely fell asleep a couple of times and had to go back and rewatch some scenes. This one was exceedingly boring
Yeah,
in a lot of cases, and worst of all, I think my biggest problem with the whole thing is not a lot happens in this movie.
no, this almost feels like it should have been like they took the conclusion and
Yep.
stretched it out to
Yeah.
over an hour and 30 minutes.
Yep. Exactly. Um, yeah. I mean, basically, the gist of the movie is, uh, man. I guess Metfi's kind of maneuvers Haruro into a romantic situation in an effort, I guess maybe I don't know. I don't know if he was deliberately trying to have him have children, but whatever. But um, like
Yeah, that was all kind of odd.
yeah, it was. So I'll walk that back a little bit. Really the whole movie is Metphis manipulates everyone into a position where he and his father can call down this monster. The monster shows up and destroys the spaceship. The monster then descends to the planet Earth and like chomps down on Godzilla. And literally he has Godzilla in this vice grip for like 30 minutes of the
Oh
movie.
god, yeah, it takes forever.
And when nothing happens, like he clamps down onto Godzilla, and then they talk about it for like a half hour. So, um, and then I can't even remember. Something happens where then the whole problem with the creature is that the creature is kind of non-corporeal. It's kind of an energy form, and it can touch Godzilla, but Godzilla can't touch it. So they do something to undo that, and then Godzilla like literally hits the monster like twice, I think. He hits him twice, and then hits the little black globules that generate it with his atomic breath, and then the movie's over. So I mean, just not a lot happens. It's not a great return from a content perspective for the hour and a half that you wind up investing in the movie, in my opinion.
Yeah, I went in expecting a Godzilla movie, and I got a political, religious
I don't even know.
drama.
Political, religious. I don't even. And I mean,
socio
yeah,
political commentary,
philosophical. I guess
philosophical. Yeah,
because the entire premise of the movie, right, as far as I could tell, is Memphis' standpoint is that the only purpose for a race is for it to exist in a piece of time, right? That there's no permanence to the existence of any race. That the only reason it exists is just to contribute to the greater universe for its life cycle of time, and then to eventually, as it burns out, to destroy everything that it built. And I guess in a way to make space for the next race that comes behind it. So his whole argument, I guess, at the end of the day, is like life is pointless, and so
Yeah.
and so
Your only point is to make room for the next one coming up.
Yeah, and so all the arguments between all the characters in the movie kind of revolves around that, and then and I guess the opposing thought is to cast Metphes in the light of this religious cult leader who shouldn't be believed, because ultimately he doesn't have the best interests of people that he gets of his congregation in mind. So I do have a few scenes that I want to talk about, I guess, really quickly. At about 42 minutes into the movie, 42 minutes into an hour and a half movie, Godzilla finally awakens. So this is a Godzilla movie, and the flipping monster is in stasis for the first 45 minutes. And winds up awakening. So the interesting part of this scene is the walk up to this scene this is when Metphes and his father have called forth Ghidorah, I think is the name of the monster, and it destroys the ship in space. So when this happens, all sorts of readings go all bonkers and crazy on the planet. And what's interesting is in a very kind of Platoon way. So I don't know if you remember Platoon with Charlie Sheen, but one of his lines in the movie is he talks about Barnes, who is played by Willem Dafoe. I think that's Willem. I can't remember the characters' names, but he has two mentors. One is Tom Berenger and one is Willem Dafoe. And Berenger is kind of the evil of the two, and Willem Dafoe is the more ethical of the two. And Charlie Sheen's character mentions that his life is kind of like these two older brothers fighting for possession of his soul. There's a little bit of that in this where Metphes represents one thing that's trying to influence Haruo Sakaki. And the other character who comes on to kind of influence him is a Dr. Martin. Martin extends from the first movie. He's kind of the science brain for the Earth forces. He's the one who helps Haruo figure out like what Godzilla's weaknesses are and how he manifests and generates his powers. He is very much more the science side, the scientific archetype in this movie, and I guess he's diametrically opposed to Metphes, who's entirely spiritual, I guess, in some ways. So at this point, it's interesting because this is the most significant. This is kind of Dr. Martin to this point has been, across the three movies, I think has been talking to Haruo, but has never had as strong an influence as he has had on what that character's choices are as they are in this movie, where he comes at this point and convinces Haruo that he just needs to disappear. He actually needs to be hidden away from Metphes so that Metphes can neither influence him nor use his presence to manipulate other followers into, I guess, joining this religion. Did this scene stick out to you, or do you remember the character, or did anything particular about Dr. Martin stick out to you, Peter, in watching the movie?
Yeah, he did seem to be kind of the voice of reason, but to say this is the scene where Godzilla awakens, I mean, I don't know. I think it's the scene where Godzilla just kind of opens his eyes and rolls over a bit.
Yeah. I shouldn't say this is not necessarily the scene where I don't know that Godzilla ever becomes like effective or a major chess piece in this movie until like the last 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah. But yeah, no, this and being the fan I am of Godzilla and the more recent live action one, people's biggest criticism is that you didn't see the full upright Godzilla in all of his glory until, I don't know, 2/3 of the movie. But you caught glimpses of him and you knew he was doing stuff. You saw the evidence of what was going on, which was very true to the original movie. This one, their portrayal of Godzilla, I mean, he's like that magic statue you spend all movie trying to awaken so he can do the one cool thing.
Yeah, and I'm hoping I'm hoping you get a chance to go back and watch at least the first movie. And I would actually say for you, so I am not a Godzilla fan. Like I'm familiar with the content, but I think for you it might be worthy to go back and watch the first two movies. The first one you really get a healthy helping of Godzilla once you swim through the first, again, 45 minutes. Uh,
Right.
so the other scene I wanted to bring up was at about minute 29 in the movie. This is where on the second attempt there is a mating between um,
I was
one.
so confused by that scene. I didn't know if things were happening in real time or if it was telepathic or like
Yeah,
what the
it's
hell?
well, it's the first thing, as far as I could tell, is that there's actually two of these women
Right.
that are with Haruro. They're twins, um, and the first one he takes off with that Dr. Martin sends him away with, makes an attempt to mate with him, and he doesn't take it at that point. Um, and she goes back. She is actually the one in this scene who is back, who has found Metphes and is talking to him telepathically. Meanwhile, her sister has gone and met Haruro in hiding, and it's the two of them that actually have sex and wind up having children by the time the whole movie is over. So in this scene, we get Haruro. What happens in this scene to me is it's a little bit of relaxation of Haruro. It's also Haruro coming to terms. One thing we haven't talked about is at the beginning of the movie, there is a female companion, really who goes all the way back to the first movie, who I think there was some degree of like puppy love, or the two of them had grown up together as members in this military force that was in space. And in the first movie, there's a lot of tension between them because um, they grew up together as military officers, but then at least at the beginning of the movie, Haruo is the one who commits a crime and gets thrown in the brig. When he's returned to active duty, she feels betrayed, right? Because they both grew up and took an oath to believe in something, but he broke with that oath. So she's actually one of his strongest antagonists in terms of him being returned to command. But then at a certain point, like rolls and then like flips and gets back into the mode of like super loyalty. Apparently in the second movie, she winds up being placed in a very deep coma and is not functioning at this point. But Haru is still clinging on to the thoughts of her. I think, in my opinion, romantically. It is at this point in the movie where he, I think, finally gets over that and realizes that there are human emotional needs that he has. His whole life can't be fighting Godzilla. It's very much the Armageddon scene, right? Like if we're not fighting for love, then what the hell are we saving the planet for? And I thought that was a very interesting thing for an anime movie to kind of latch on to, that had not really been going down that path this whole time. Peter, your impressions of this scene, if it sticks out, and or just your overall impressions of just kind of how some of the relationships kind of flowed in this movie.
So confused. um, like I said earlier, this whole scene, I wasn't sure which. It took me a while to figure out that there was twins, and it took me a while to figure out what was actually going on and what was real and what was mental. But yeah, I do feel that you are correct, because Haru did really seem to be attached to that fatally injured officer, or at least somewhat fatally injured officer. He did really seem to stick around longer than what I would imagine protocol would dictate for a soldier.
Yeah. That's unfortunately it's a thing that definitely builds upon like things that they presented in the first and probably second movie as well. So overall, your feelings on cinematography for this movie?
And visually, it was not ugly to look at. I mean, it was well. There was some stylistic uh, choices that didn't click with me so well. Um, sometimes in these animated movies, animators have a tendency to either go hyper realistic or cartoonish, and I find that I generally prefer the more cartoonish, uh, because of that uncanny valley of looking at something that looks hyper realistic and having that problem in your mind with your brain keeping saying to you, "This isn't real. This isn't real. It's too real to be real." So I wasn't too. I mean, it's a personal thing. I didn't dig some of the hyper realistic animation, but otherwise, I can't find a fault in it.
Yeah, I found, it was a toss up, right? Like what I really liked about the movie, and again, I'm probably conflating the two movies together. The sense of motion and fluidity and just how the way the characters moved, I thought was excellently done. If anything, I'm gonna again encourage you to go watch the first movie, because what you missed is you missed the speeder bikes, the jet bikes, and I think that's worth seeing. Um, but I think the biggest problem I had with the artistic style overall is that, again, there's supposed to be these three races of humans, Billisuto, and Exif, and it's really hard to tell the difference between the three of them. Like, there's virtually none, and I felt like they could have stylistically done something more specific. I think they tried with the Exif. They tried to show them as taller, and having a very particular hairstyle, but like, I didn't feel that was particularly effective.
Yeah, I just figured the Billisuto weren't an actual other race. I figured they were just another group of humans.
Right, right. So that to me was problematic. The creature work, however, I would say, like, Godzilla looked beautiful.
Yeah.
Quite honestly, I feel like Godzilla in this movie looks a lot better than he's been presented in some of the live action stuff. So,
beats a guy in a plastic suit.
right. So overall, I thought the cinematography wasn't too bad. They could have varied camera angle a little more. I felt a lot of it looked very kind of static. It was kind of only one angle that they would hit characters with in terms of when they were doing close-ups. So, so like I said, I mean, I guess I'm kind of in the same place you are. Like I felt like I could pick out things that were really well done, but I also picked out a lot of things that were very so-so. So overall, music, soundtrack, audio production, anything stand out to you at all?
I find honestly that especially in animes, the there's a lot of use of silence in the soundtrack, and sometimes it's hit, sometimes it's missed for me. Nothing really sticks out in my head. Really, it's all fairly consistent with what I would expect. Um, there were some quiet scenes that I thought the silence was more impactful than music, though. So
Yeah, and I will admit I did not kind of put my ears on and like pay super close attention to the music and audio production. It didn't jump out at me as like something that jolted me to recognizing it without specifically focusing on it. I do feel like I was a fan of the primary soundtrack theme for the title and the closing credits. That did stand out to me a little bit, although I can't play it back in my head right now. Um, but when having watched the first movie, I was able to recognize it in the third movie. Um, so again, not, I mean, obviously nothing that stood out like a John Williams theme, or even a Zimmerman theme, but still, decent thematic consistency and representation for an anime soundtrack from the beginning of the trilogy to the end. So our final bullet point in the agenda is, let's score this thing. Peter, I will let you go first.
um, If I could recuse myself, I would. Um, Only because I don't feel like I'd be giving it a fair score. Um, as a standalone movie, um, I had problems following the plot. I didn't know the characters. There wasn't really any introduction, a strong character development or introduction. Um, and the plot, there just wasn't enough build up for me to really care to a certain degree until probably 15 minutes before the end of the movie when I felt like things started happening and there was more than just the implied tension. So with that in mind, because I haven't seen the other two movies to help with the context and the development, it's going to be a 3. And I know that's a lot of asterisks.
No, and again, I don't necessarily think that. So the movie is a 5.5 for me, and I mean, so 5.5 is below like my grade of like an average film to me is like it's like a 6, but even a 6, I feel like, I could have spent my time better doing something else. Um, you know, 5.5, and I gave it the extra half point for, really for the for those bits and pieces of animation that I thought worked well in the graphics presentation. But I mean, really, it's a yeah, it's it's not something I would normally encourage myself to spend my time watching or anybody else to spend their time watching. And definitely, if it were not, it's another thing. Movies homework assignment. I would have definitely bounced off of it in like the first 5 to 10 minutes and gone and found something else to do. Um, You know what I mean? I even think that there are better animes, more entertaining animes on Netflix to watch. So this is a thing where it's a very particular taste and a very particular niche, I think, um, and and certainly culturally, in the U.S., like there's value in Netflix bringing this content to its network, but it just didn't really particularly do anything for me. Anything else you want to mention about this before we move on and let's rinse our mouth out of this particular taste with selecting our next movies for assignment?
We've had quite a pair of movies the last couple times, haven't we?
Well, we did. So what did we do before this? Was the Orson Welles
Yeah.
films? Yeah, but my thing is, and I know that the Orson Welles movies were not my normal thing, and it definitely took like biting my lip and sticking with it. But I feel like there was a ton of artistic return.
Right.
In,
Oh no, I'm not saying it was a bad movie. I'm just saying we've had quite a run of atypical movies.
yes, yeah. We've definitely watched. We've definitely been watching some niche, some niche films. So I hope I was not out of order. I believe
No,
that.
you're good.
Okay, yeah. So I think you pitched.
I pitched last time, so it's your
Okay.
turn.
Okay. So the three movies I have available for selection is Our Idiot Brother, which is a 2011 release. And what I've done, Peter, I should mention in pitching these is because we haven't really had a good way to arbitrate how do we return to green when our schedule gets off track. I just selected from movies that are dropping the next 2 weeks on Netflix rather than saying bottom half of February, right? Or
Right.
skipping the bottom half of February and moving entirely to the first 2 weeks of March. Uh, so the first movie I pitched is Our Idiot Brother, a 2011 release, which drops on the 26th of February. This is a Paul Rudd film where and I forget the synopsis a little bit, but it's him and I think four sisters of his, and it's a comedy of them trying to get him back on track. I think is the main shtick of the movie. There's also a slight problem here where we've had the thing where sometimes they're in Hollywood where movies will have the same title throughout history, where sometimes we think it's one movie that's dropping on Netflix, but it actually winds up being another. I think we're safe with this one. Sweeney Todd is one that I'm not absolutely certain about. I think this is the and I didn't write down what year this released. I think this is the fairly recent.
2007 with Johnny Depp.
Yeah. I shouldn't necessarily call that recent, but I think it's the Johnny Depp one. I have watched the, I think his name is Paul Winstone one, who's the British actor. So I watched that one, I think, on A&E, and it was fairly interesting. So I'm actually interested in watching this to see how it pairs up. Again, I hope that it is the Johnny Depp, Helena Bonham Carter one. But that drops on the 1st of March. The final pick is one that drops on the 13th. It is actually a Netflix original starring Ben Affleck and a cast of other very current modern actors who are popular in Hollywood. Called Triple Frontier, which is a bunch of ex-spec ops types who then get together after getting out of the military to pull off a bank heist. So I thought that one might be pretty interesting. So with those selections there for you on the menu, what do you pick?
Boy. I've never heard of Our Idiot Brother. I do like Victorian England. And then we have essentially, I'm guessing, a fictional version of Three Kings with Ben Affleck. The story to George Clooney.
So the summary is 5 former special forces operatives reunite to plan a heist in a sparsely populated multi-border zone of South America.
Yeah.
For the first time in their prestigious careers, these unsung heroes undertake this dangerous mission for self instead of country, but when events take an unexpected turn and threaten to spiral out of control, their skills, their loyalties, and their morals are pushed to a breaking point in an epic battle for survival. This has Ben Affleck, Charlie Hunnam, Pedro Pascal, Oscar Isaac, who is our friend Poe from the new Star Wars films.
He's been in a lot of things lately, I've noticed.
Well, his big thing that I think we watched on previous versions of this podcast was what was the name? The Machina.
Oh, yeah, that was before me.
Okay, all right. Yes, they're right. That may have been before you. Garrett Hetland as well.
There's a lot of people on here.
Yeah.
And it's I'm actually curious just because this is a Netflix original.
Okay.
I think this is going to be. I'm hoping this will be action-packed and fun.
Yeah, I think it will be also, and it stars Affleck, who, I mean, despite all the shade he gets, like, really doesn't. I mean, hasn't done much bad in recent years.
No, and honestly, he can write, he can direct, and he can act.
Right.
He doesn't always choose to, but he can.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm perfectly fine with that. It gives us kind of a long cycle before we reconvene, but I think that's also fine. So we will get back together sometime in mid-March to talk Triple Frontier. I'm actually very interested to watch.
I'm really curious about Netflix originals in general, and one of the first ones we did with this iteration was a Netflix original cartoon, and that was just, I think I still talk about that movie.
Oh yeah, I was absolutely stunned by how good that movie was. Yeah, I mean, again, we've been fortunate with our picks, but we have yet to stumble across a bad Netflix original. So
yeah.
All right, man. Very cool. Well, that's going to do it for us for tonight, Peter, unless you have anything else.
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, on behalf of the E2KG Network, Gearworks.com, and the Rounding Off Affinity channel on YouTube, thanks so much, everybody, for joining in for this episode of It's Another Thing Movies, covering Godzilla, Planet Eater, the 3rd chapter in the anime trilogy, distributed by Netflix. You can come back and join us sometime in mid-March when we will reconvene to talk Triple Frontier, the Netflix original movie starring Ben Affleck. So until next time, happy hunting, take care of yourselves, and stay safe out there. That's going to do it for us. We are out of here.